still remember the exact moment when social anxiety took control of my life. Standing outside the conference room, palms sweating, heart pounding against my ribcage like it wanted to escape. I was about to present to the executive team something I had done successfully dozens of times before. But that morning something changed. My mouth went dry. My thoughts scattered like startled birds. When I finally walked in, the faces looking back at me seemed to morph into judges, critics ready to tear apart every word, every gesture. I stumbled through the presentation, forgetting key points, rambling nervously to fill silences. Afterward, I locked myself in a bathroom stall and tried to control my breathing. What was happening to me? I had always been the confident one, the person colleagues described as natural with people. Now, I dreaded every interaction, rehearsing conversations in my head only to freeze when the moment arrived. Maybe you know this feeling, the anticipatory anxiety before social events, the overthinking after conversations, the exhaustion from constantly monitoring yourself, your words, your posture, how much eye contact you are making. Perhaps you have found yourself declining invitations, making excuses to avoid meetings, or hiding behind screens because face-to-face interactions have become minefields of potential embarrassment. What if I told you that the solution does not require medication, years of therapy, or completely overhauling your personality? What if 5 minutes each morning could gradually transform how you show up socially, building authentic confidence from the inside out? This is not about fake positivity or suppressing your natural tendencies. It is about neurologically rewiring your brain's automated response to social situations. And it begins with understanding why your mind betrays you precisely when you need it most. When William Gardner first came to my coaching practice, he was a paradox. As a successful software engineer managing teams across 3 continents, he appeared confident in his technical abilities. Yet social situations left him paralyzed with dread. "I can debug the most complex code," he told me during our first session, "but I cannot debug my own thoughts before a team meeting. The anxiety starts the night before, planning exactly what I will say, how I will sit, when I should speak up. By morning, I am exhausted before the day even begins." William is far from alone. Social anxiety affects approximately 15 million American adults, making it the second most commonly diagnosed anxiety disorder. But even more concerning are the millions who never receive a formal diagnosis, instead believing they are simply awkward, introverted, or not good with people. The science behind social anxiety reveals something fascinating. It stems from an evolutionary protection mechanism gone haywire. Our prehistoric ancestors survived by belonging to tribes. Being rejected or ostracized meant certain death. This created a powerful neurological circuit that remains with us today, monitoring social threats with the same urgency as physical dangers. Dr. Matthew Lieberman, a leading neuroscientist at UCLA, calls this social pain. His research shows that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain. This explains why criticism or embarrassment can feel as threatening as physical danger. Your brain literally processes them through similar neural pathways. But here is where it gets interesting. Your brain does not just react to actual social threats, it proactively scans for potential ones. This predictive processing means you start experiencing anxiety before the social event even occurs. Your brain, trying to protect you, creates simulations of what might go wrong. For William, this manifested as elaborate mental rehearsals before meetings. He would imagine potential questions, practice answers, and visualize himself speaking confidently. But this strategy backfired spectacularly. By the time the actual meeting arrived, his mental resources were depleted from hours of anxious preparation. The very tool he used to manage anxiety was actually amplifying it. This brings us to the critical question. If our brains are wired to perceive social situations as potential threats, how do we intervene in this automatic process? How do we transform our neurological response without medication? Meredith Vaughn always considered herself socially awkward. As a brilliant research scientist, she found data and experiments far more predictable than people. "Numbers do not judge you," she often said. But when her work required presenting findings at conferences and networking with potential research partners, her anxiety became debilitating. I would wake up on presentation days with my stomach in knots, Meredith explained. By the time I reached the venue, I had already lived through 100 versions of everything that could go wrong. What Meredith did not realize was that those first moments after waking were programming her entire day. Neuroscience has revealed something remarkable about our brain state during the transition from sleep to wakefulness. The neural pathways are uniquely receptive to programming. During sleep, your brain processes and consolidates information from the previous day. As you wake, it enters a state called hypnopompia, a transitional consciousness where the analytical prefrontal cortex has not fully re-engaged, but your brain is receptive to new input. Essentially, your mental operating system is booting up and looking for the day's programming. Dr. Jeffrey Hull, executive coach and author of Flex, The Art and Science of Leadership in a Changing World, describes this as the cognitive prime time, a window where we can influence our neural pathways before habitual thought patterns take over. Most people squander this precious neurological state. They immediately reach for their phones, flooding their receptive minds with social media, emails, or news, essentially installing anxiety-producing software first thing in the morning. Others allow their thoughts to automatically drift to upcoming challenges, unknowingly rehearsing anxiety rather than confidence. This raises an intriguing possibility. What if we could intentionally program our brain during this receptive state? What if the first 5 minutes after waking could reshape our entire relationship with social interaction? Before revealing the specific 5-minute routine, we need to understand another piece of the puzzle: the difference between situational confidence and baseline social comfort. Many techniques focus on managing anxiety in the moment: deep breathing, positive self-talk, or power posing before important interactions. While these have their place, they represent temporary fixes rather than systemic changes. What we are after is something deeper, a fundamental shift in how your brain interprets social situations at the subconscious level. This is where morning neurological programming becomes revolutionary. But this approach raises important questions. How exactly does morning programming work? Why 5 minutes rather than 20 or 30? And perhaps most importantly, how does a morning routine transfer to social situations that might happen hours later? To answer these questions, we need to understand the concept of neuroplasticity, your brain's remarkable ability to rewire itself based on experience and focused attention. For decades, scientists believed that brain development stopped after childhood. We now know this view was completely wrong. Your brain continues forming new neural connections throughout your entire life, a process called neuroplasticity. This means that with consistent practice, you can literally rewire the neural pathways associated with social anxiety. The key word here is consistent. Sporadic efforts produce minimal results because neuroplasticity requires repetition to form stable pathways. This is why the 5-minute morning routine must become non-negotiable, like brushing your teeth or showering. But why specifically 5 minutes? Research on habit formation and neural programming suggests something fascinating. Shorter, consistent practices yield better results than longer, intermittent ones. A landmark study from University College London found that the optimal time for daily habit formation falls between 3 to 7 minutes, long enough to engage neural pathways but short enough to ensure consistent practice. This explains why many lengthy morning routines fail. 20 or 30-minute practices might seem ideal, but they become unsustainable on busy mornings, leading to inconsistent application and minimal neurological change. Now for the crucial question. How does a morning routine affect social situations that occur hours later? The answer lies in understanding that social anxiety is not just situational, it is systemic. What appears as anxiety in the moment actually stems from ongoing patterns of thought and physiological responses that operate below conscious awareness. Dr. Ellen Langer, Harvard psychologist and mindfulness researcher, explains it this way: what we experience as situational anxiety is actually the culmination of pre-existing cognitive patterns being triggered. Change the patterns and you change the response. This explains why conventional advice like, just be confident, or focus on others instead of yourself, often fails. These approaches target conscious behavior rather than the underlying neural frameworks that generate anxiety in the first place. To truly transform social anxiety, we need to address three core components: the cognitive, thought patterns, the physiological body responses, and the behavioral, social habits. The 5-minute morning routine strategically targets all three areas through a sequence specifically designed to leverage the brain's morning receptivity. But before diving into the routine itself, let us examine a critical distinction that most anxiety reduction approaches miss entirely. When struggling with social anxiety, the natural impulse is to seek more confidence. This seems logical. If anxiety represents a lack of confidence, then building confidence should solve the problem. Yet this approach often backfires spectacularly. Consider Thomas, a marketing executive who came to me after being passed over for promotion. "They said I lack executive presence," he explained. "So I started reading books on confidence, practicing power poses before meetings, even using affirmations every morning telling myself I am confident and powerful." The result? His anxiety actually increased. Colleagues described him as coming across more stilted and uncomfortable than before. This seemingly contradictory outcome reveals what I call the confidence paradox. The more directly you pursue confidence, the more elusive it becomes. Why? Because focusing on confidence keeps the spotlight firmly on yourself, your performance, how you are coming across, whether you are succeeding at appearing confident. This self-monitoring intensifies the very self-consciousness that feeds social anxiety. Genuine social comfort emerges not from self-focus but from self-forgetting. This distinction is crucial. Confidence as a goal keeps you trapped in self-evaluation. Social ease comes from being so engaged with others and the present moment that self-consciousness naturally dissolves. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman from Stanford University has studied this phenomenon extensively. His research shows that attempting to directly control anxiety activates the brain's control centers, particularly the prefrontal cortex, which paradoxically increases nervous system activation. Meanwhile, approaches that redirect attention outward naturally down-regulate the sympathetic nervous system without requiring conscious control. This insight transforms our approach completely. Rather than trying to build confidence directly, the 5-minute morning routine creates the conditions for self-consciousness to naturally dissipate. It shifts your baseline state away from self-monitoring and toward present-moment engagement. But even with this understanding, questions remain. How exactly do we implement this in a practical morning routine? What specific elements create the most powerful neurological shift? And how do we ensure that changes made in the morning transfer to social situations throughout the day? After working with hundreds of clients struggling with social anxiety, from CEOs to students, performers to healthcare professionals, I have refined the morning protocol into 5 distinct components. Each builds upon the previous, creating a neurological cascade effect that transforms your baseline social state. The entire sequence takes exactly 5 minutes, with each component allocated a specific time frame based on neurological research. The order is deliberate and should not be changed, as each step prepares the brain for the next. Here is the complete protocol. Minute 1. Physiological reset, 60 seconds. The sequence begins by directly addressing your nervous system. Social anxiety manifests physically as much as mentally: racing heart, shallow breathing, muscle tension. These physiological responses trigger mental anxiety in a self-reinforcing loop. The reset interrupts this cycle through a specific breathing pattern that activates the parasympathetic nervous system, your body's rest and digest mode. This is not ordinary deep breathing, but a precisely calibrated pattern that research shows most effectively resets nervous system functioning. The pattern is simple. Inhale for 4 counts through your nose, hold for 2 counts. Exhale for 6 counts through slightly pursed lips, hold for 2 counts. Repeat this cycle 5 times, which takes approximately 60 seconds. This breathing ratio has been shown in research from the HeartMath Institute to create coherence between heart rate variability and brain wave activity, establishing a physiological foundation for calm social engagement later in the day. William initially resisted this component. "I have tried breathing techniques before," he told me. "They help momentarily, but the anxiety always returns." What he did not understand was that morning breathing serves a different purpose than in-the-moment techniques. It is not about calming current anxiety, but about resetting the baseline operating state of your nervous system. After 2 weeks of consistent practice, William noticed something remarkable. His baseline physiological state had shifted. "I used to wake up with my stomach immediately tight with anxiety," he reported. "Now there's a noticeable difference in how my body feels from the moment I wake up." Minute 2. Cognitive decentering, 60 seconds. With the physiological foundation established, the second minute addresses the cognitive component of social anxiety, the thought patterns that generate and sustain anxiety. The technique used here is called decentering, a metacognitive approach drawn from mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. Rather than trying to change anxious thoughts, which paradoxically can increase their power, decentering changes your relationship to thoughts. For 60 seconds, you simply notice thoughts as they arise, labeling them with the phrase, "I notice I am having the thought that." This creates psychological distance between you and your thoughts, weakening their automatic influence. For Meredith, this component proved transformative. "I always believed my anxious thoughts. If I thought people would judge my presentation negatively, it felt absolutely true," she explained. Learning to see thoughts as mental events rather than facts was revolutionary. The instruction is simple. For 1 minute, whenever a thought arises, particularly about upcoming social interactions, mentally note, "I notice I am having the thought that." Content of thought. Do this without analyzing or arguing with the thoughts, simply observe and label. This practice activates the brain's observing self, mediated primarily through the lateral prefrontal cortex, which research shows reduces the emotional impact of negative thoughts without requiring you to dispute or change them. A much more efficient approach. Minute 3. Social visualization, 60 seconds. The third minute introduces a specialized form of visualization that differs significantly from positive thinking or traditional visualization techniques. Rather than visualizing yourself performing perfectly in social situations, which actually increases performance pressure, this component uses process visualization, mentally rehearsing the internal experience of social ease rather than external outcomes. For 60 seconds, you visualize yourself in a typical social situation that would normally trigger anxiety. But with a crucial twist, you focus exclusively on the sensation of being comfortably engaged with others. Not on saying clever things or making a perfect impression, but on the feeling of being present, curious, and comfortably in your body. The neurological impact is profound. Research by Dr. Sion Bylock at the University of Chicago demonstrates that process visualization activates neural pathways associated with procedural memory rather than declarative memory, essentially programming your brain for how it feels rather than what to do. William described this distinction perfectly. "Before, I would visualize exactly what to say in meetings, planning my contributions word for word. This new approach is entirely different. I visualize the feeling of being engaged without self-consciousness. It's less about the content and more about the state of being." The instruction. Bring to mind a specific upcoming social situation. Rather than rehearsing what you will say or imagining a perfect outcome, focus exclusively on how it would feel to be comfortably engaged, the physical sensation of being present, the feeling of curiosity about others, the experience of speaking naturally without self-monitoring. Minute 4. Identity priming, 60 seconds. The fourth minute addresses perhaps the most fundamental aspect of social anxiety, how you conceptualize yourself in relation to others. People with social anxiety often hold a core identity as someone who is socially awkward, bad with people, or always anxious in groups. Identity priming replaces these limiting self-concepts with an alternative identity based on your genuine values and natural strengths in relating to others. This is not positive thinking or affirmations. It is connecting to authentic aspects of yourself that may be overshadowed by anxiety. For 60 seconds, you mentally embody a specific social identity that feels authentic yet represents your best self in social contexts. This might be the curious listener, the thoughtful observer, the genuine connector, or any identity that resonates with your natural inclinations while enabling more comfortable social engagement. Meredith connected strongly with the identity of the curious investigator, a natural extension of her scientific mindset applied to social contexts. Rather than seeing myself as the awkward person at conferences, I began to approach conversations with the same curiosity I bring to research. It completely changed how I felt in networking situations. The instruction. For 1 minute, mentally step into a specific social identity that represents how you naturally connect with others at your best. Visualize approaching interactions from this identity, feeling its qualities as vividly as possible. This is not about pretending to be someone you are not, but about emphasizing aspects of yourself that enable comfortable connection. Research on primed identities from social psychology shows that briefly activating specific self-concepts significantly influences subsequent behavior in identity-relevant situations without conscious effort or ongoing attention. Minute 5. Implementation intention, 60 seconds. The final minute bridges the gap between morning practice and real-world application through a specific psychological technique called implementation intentions. Standard goal setting, I will be more socially confident today, produces minimal behavioral change. Implementation intentions, by contrast, create precise if-then plans that automatically trigger new behaviors when specific situations arise. For 60 seconds, you formulate 1 to 2 specific implementation intentions for social situations likely to occur that day. These take the form, when specific trigger, I will, specific response. William created implementation intentions like, when I enter the conference room, I will take 3 deep breaths and focus on being curious about others' perspectives. And when I notice myself monitoring how I'm coming across, I will redirect my attention to fully listening to what's being said. The instruction. Identify 1 to 2 specific social situations likely to occur today. For each, create an if-then plan that specifies 1. The exact trigger situation, and 2. The precise response you will automatically implement. State these intentions clearly and visualize executing them smoothly when the trigger occurs. Research from Peter Gallwitzer at New York University shows that implementation intentions dramatically increase follow-through on intentions, often by 300% or more, because they bypass the need for conscious decision-making in the moment. The power of this 5-minute routine comes not just from each individual component, but from their synergistic interaction. Each minute builds upon the previous, creating a comprehensive rewiring of your approach to social situations. The physiological reset creates the bodily conditions for calm engagement. The cognitive decentering weakens the grip of anxious thoughts. The social visualization establishes a template for comfortable social presence. The identity priming activates your natural social strengths. And the implementation intentions bridge morning practice with real-world application. When practiced consistently, this sequence creates what neuroscientists call long-term potentiation, strengthening specific neural pathways through repeated activation. Over time, the brain requires less conscious effort to activate these pathways, making social ease increasingly automatic. Thomas, the marketing executive mentioned earlier, discovered this after 6 weeks of consistent practice. The change wasn't dramatic at first, just subtle shifts in how I felt before meetings. But around week 5, I noticed something remarkable. I had gone through an entire client presentation without a single moment of self-consciousness. It wasn't until afterward that I even realized it. This gradual transformation reflects how neurological change actually occurs. Unlike medication, which can produce immediate but temporary changes, neuroplasticity-based approaches create sustained transformation through consistent practice over time. But questions naturally arise. How long before seeing results? Does this work for everyone? What if severe anxiety has been present for years or decades? And perhaps most importantly, how do you maintain the practice when results aren't immediately apparent? The journey from social anxiety to comfortable engagement follows a relatively predictable timeline, though individual experiences vary based on severity, duration of anxiety, and consistency of practice. Days 1 to 7. The awareness phase during the first week. Most people notice minimal external changes, but significant internal shifts. You become more aware of anxiety patterns, particularly how thoughts and physical sensations interact to create social discomfort. William described his first week. I didn't feel dramatically different in meetings, but I started noticing exactly when anxiety began. Usually with a thought like, they'll think my idea is stupid, followed immediately by tension in my chest. Just seeing this pattern created a sense of perspective I hadn't had before. This heightened awareness, while sometimes uncomfortable, represents a crucial first step. You cannot change patterns you cannot see. Days 8 to 21. The fluctuation phase, the second and third weeks typically bring noticeable but inconsistent improvements. Some social interactions feel surprisingly comfortable while others trigger familiar anxiety. This inconsistency often leads people to abandon the practice, believing it works sometimes but not others. In reality, this fluctuation is evidence the brain is actively rewiring, creating new neural pathways while older, anxiety-based pathways remain partially active. Meredith experienced this phase vividly. Some research presentations went amazingly well. I felt present and engaged without self-consciousness. But others triggered the same old anxiety. The difference was I now recognized this as part of the process rather than evidence the approach wasn't working. Days 22 to 40. The integration phase, by weeks 4 through 6. Most people experience substantial shifts in their baseline social comfort. The new neural pathways strengthen while older anxiety patterns weaken through disuse. During this phase, social ease becomes less effortful and more natural. You might still experience anxiety in particularly challenging situations, but your recovery time shortens dramatically, returning to baseline comfort much more quickly. William noticed this shift during a high-stakes presentation to company executives. I felt the familiar anxiety spike when the CEO asked an unexpected question. But instead of derailing me for the entire meeting, the discomfort passed within seconds. I redirected to my curious problem-solver identity and actually enjoyed the challenge of addressing his concern. Days 41 plus. The automaticity phase. After approximately 6 weeks of consistent practice, most people reach what psychologists call automaticity, the point where new patterns operate largely without conscious effort. Social ease becomes your new baseline, with anxiety becoming the exception rather than the rule. This does not mean social anxiety disappears completely. Rather, it shifts from a dominant, controlling force to an occasional visitor that no longer defines your social experience. Meredith described reaching this phase beautifully. I realized the transformation was complete when I volunteered to lead a workshop at a conference, something I would have found unthinkable months earlier. What struck me wasn't the absence of anxiety but my relationship to it. The nervous energy felt more like excitement than fear, and my attention stayed with the audience rather than monitoring myself. While the 5-minute routine produces remarkable results for most people, individual challenges may require specific adaptations. Here are the most common obstacles and their solutions. Challenge number 1. I forget to do the routine some mornings. This is by far the most common issue. Neuroplasticity requires consistency, yet establishing new morning habits proves difficult for many. Solution: use habit stacking. Attach the routine to an existing habit you never skip, such as brushing your teeth or making coffee. Additionally, prepare your environment the night before by placing a visual reminder, like a note or specific object, where you'll definitely see it upon waking. Challenge number 2. I do the routine but get distracted by thoughts. Mental wandering during the practice can reduce its effectiveness, particularly during the cognitive decentering and visualization components. Solution: accept distraction as normal rather than fighting it, which creates more tension. When you notice your mind wandering, gently return to the current component without self-criticism. Also, consider using minimal verbal guidance, either recorded in your own voice or mentally narrated, to structure each minute. Challenge number 3. I struggle with the implementation intentions in specific situations. Some people create implementation intentions that prove too complicated or vague to execute in real social situations. Solution: simplify your intentions to focus on internal states rather than specific behaviors. For example, rather than "when meeting new people, I will ask 3 questions and maintain eye contact," try "when meeting new people, I will focus on feeling curious about who they are." The simpler and more internally focused, the more likely you'll follow through. Challenge number 4. I have severe, long-standing social anxiety. While the 5-minute routine helps most people, severe or clinical social anxiety may require additional support. Solution: use the routine as a complement to professional treatment rather than a replacement. Research shows that neuroplasticity-based approaches actually enhance the effectiveness of therapy and/or medication by establishing daily reinforcement of new neural pathways. While the morning routine forms the foundation of transformation, specific extensions can accelerate and deepen the results. Micro-resets throughout the day, brief 30-second resets before important social interactions, reinforce the morning programming. These micro-practices consist of 3 deep breaths combined with quickly activating your chosen social identity. William implemented this before every meeting. Just taking 30 seconds outside the conference room to breathe and reconnect with my curious problem solver identity created a bridge between my morning practice and the actual social situation. Evening reflection, adding a 2-minute evening practice significantly enhances neural consolidation. Simply review moments during the day when you experienced natural social ease, even briefly, focusing on how it felt internally. This selectively reinforces positive neural pathways through what neuroscientists call targeted memory reactivation. Weekly adaptation. Social growth requires periodically updating your approach. Once weekly, review your implementation intentions and social identity, refining them based on recent experiences. This prevents the routine from becoming stale and ensures it evolves with your progress. Meredith found this weekly adaptation crucial. As I became more comfortable with one aspect of social interaction, new challenges emerged. Updating my implementation intentions weekly kept the practice relevant to my current growth edge. As your relationship with social anxiety transforms, something remarkable emerges: the possibility of social flow. This state represents not just the absence of anxiety, but the presence of genuine engagement and enjoyment in connection with others. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi pioneered research on flow states, optimal experiences characterized by complete absorption in the present moment, intrinsic enjoyment, and effortless attention. While typically discussed in relation to creative or athletic pursuits, flow can equally emerge in social contexts. Social flow occurs when your attention moves from self-monitoring to complete engagement with the interaction itself. Conversation becomes energizing rather than depleting. Authentic self-expression happens naturally without rehearsal or filtering. Time seems to transform. Conversations fly by that once would have felt interminable. Thomas experienced this shift after approximately 2 months of practice. I used to leave social events exhausted from the constant effort of managing my anxiety and presentation. Now I often leave energized, having completely lost track of time in engaging conversations. The difference in how it feels is difficult to overstate. This transformation reflects a fundamental truth about social interaction. Anxiety and enjoyment cannot coexist because they require different attentional focuses. Anxiety demands self-focused attention, monitoring how you are coming across, analyzing your performance, scanning for signs of judgment. Enjoyment requires other focused attention, genuine curiosity, present moment awareness, and immersion in the exchange itself. The 5-minute routine gradually shifts your attentional patterns from self-focus to engagement focus, opening the possibility for social flow to emerge naturally. While reduced anxiety and increased enjoyment represent powerful personal outcomes, the professional implications prove equally significant. William's transformation extended far beyond personal comfort. 6 months after beginning the practice, I was promoted to Director of Engineering. My manager specifically cited my increased leadership presence and ability to build genuine connection with team members as key factors in the decision. This professional impact reflects research on the role of authentic social connection in leadership effectiveness. A comprehensive study from the Center for Creative Leadership found that executives derailed primarily due to inadequate interpersonal skills rather than technical incompetence. Conversely, leaders who create psychological safety through genuine connection consistently outperform those focused primarily on results. Meredith experienced similar professional benefits. My research had always been solid, but my anxiety limited my ability to build collaborative relationships with potential partners. As social interactions became more natural, research opportunities expanded dramatically. I've established 3 new cross-institutional partnerships this year alone. These outcomes reflect a crucial understanding. Social anxiety restricts not just personal comfort, but professional impact. By transforming your relationship with social interaction, You simultaneously expand your capacity for influence, collaboration, and leadership. What makes this approach sustainable when so many other anxiety reduction techniques provide only temporary relief? The answer lies in how it addresses all three levels of neurological functioning. 1. The reptilian brain, brainstem, and cerebellum. The physiological reset component directly addresses the most primitive brain structures responsible for fight-or-flight responses. Regular practice gradually recalibrates your default nervous system settings, reducing baseline physiological arousal in social situations. 2. The emotional brain, limbic system. The visualization and identity priming components reshape emotional associations with social interaction. Research using fMRI scanning shows that consistent mental rehearsal of positive social experiences actually rewires the amygdala's threat detection system, reducing automatic emotional reactivity. 3. The thinking brain, neocortex. The cognitive decentering and implementation intention components engage the prefrontal cortex in new ways, creating executive control over previously automatic thought patterns. This creates what neuroscientists call top-down regulation of emotional responses. By simultaneously addressing all three neurological levels, the practice creates comprehensive, sustainable change. Rather than merely managing symptoms, like most approaches, it transforms the underlying neural architecture generating social anxiety. If you have read this far, you likely recognize yourself in some aspect of the social anxiety experience. Perhaps you identify with William's elaborate mental rehearsals before meetings, Meredith's dread of public speaking, or Thomas's exhaustion from constant self-monitoring in social situations. The question now becomes practical. How do you begin? Start tomorrow morning with just the first component, the physiological reset. Spend 60 seconds practicing the specific breathing pattern described earlier. This small step initiates the neurological restructuring process. The following morning, add the cognitive decentering component, spending 1 minute on each. Continue adding one component daily until you are implementing the full 5-minute sequence. This gradual implementation serves two purposes. It makes starting less overwhelming, and it allows you to experience each component individually before integrating them. Remember that consistency matters more than perfection. A partially implemented practice done daily creates more neurological change than a perfect practice done sporadically. Document your experience, particularly during the fluctuation phase, weeks 2 to 3, when progress may seem inconsistent. This record becomes invaluable evidence of your journey when momentary setbacks occur. Social anxiety represents more than discomfort. It is a constraint on human connection, professional impact, and authentic self-expression. By investing 5 minutes each morning in this neurologically based practice, you begin dismantling this constraint at its roots. The transformation occurs not through fighting anxiety directly, but by establishing new neural pathways that gradually become your default mode of social engagement. Like water naturally flowing through the deepest channel, your social energy begins flowing through pathways of ease rather than anxiety. William captured this transformation eloquently. I no longer think of myself as someone with social anxiety who manages it well. That identity has been replaced by something more fundamental. I am someone who genuinely enjoys connecting with others, with occasional moments of anxiety that pass quickly without defining the experience. This represents the ultimate promise of the practice. Not just freedom from social anxiety, but freedom to experience the richness of human connection that makes life meaningful. Your journey toward this freedom begins tomorrow morning, with just 5 minutes that can ultimately transform your social experience from anxiety to authentic engagement. The neurological blueprint for change exists within you already. This practice simply activates it with remarkable efficiency. The most powerful transformations often begin with the smallest steps, in this case, 5 minutes tomorrow morning that could change your social experience for a lifetime.